Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are diving deep into this fascinating stack of sources you sent us, all about the intense, sometimes pretty brutal, but also surprisingly complex world of black grouse leks.
That's right. Yeah, you've gathered some really incredible observations and research here that honestly challenge a lot of common assumptions about animal mating behavior. So our mission in this deep dive is basically to pull out the most important insights, the unexpected facts, and try to understand what these birds can tell us about the wild forces of sexual selection.
Okay, get ready for some genuinely surprising discoveries, some pretty dramatic clashes, brutal statistics, definitely those, and maybe even, like you said, a hint of unexpected cooperation. All right, let's unpack this material you've shared.
Okay.
So first off, let's paint the picture, the leak scene. You described it really well. The display ground is in full swing, just a total spectacle.
Yeah.
And you even gave us names for some of the key players you were watching. Messy shoulder, with those odd feathers sticking out.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Old wonky tail missing a tail feather. Black bar, who had that white bum feather with a black line across it. And black spot, who it seems holds a pretty central territory.
Yeah, it's a visually and audibly very intense place. I mean, fundamentally what you're seeing is these males defending tiny, basically invisible patch boundaries on this arena.
Invisible lines.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And when a neighbor crosses that line, well, conflict is almost inevitable.
And the sound, that distinctive, irritated, bleeding chakarada call you mentioned, you noted how their neck swelling actually shrinks when they make that sound during a fight.
All part of the signaling package, yeah. And as you've clearly seen, the fighting isn't just, one type of thing. It happens in layers. You identified, 3 distinct levels of escalation?
Right, yeah. Level 1 is the most common. That's the threat display, the squaring up, just males rushing their neighbors at those boundary lines. Most interactions kind of stop there.
Okay. But if that doesn't settle it, it can escalate. Level 2, this is more physical, but still quite contained, maybe. It's described almost like choreography, males springing back and forth, carefully parrying to avoid getting hit by those sharp beaks.
Still trying not to get hurt.
Exactly. It usually ends with a kind of cautious disengagement.
But then level 3. Okay, this is where it gets genuinely violent and, frankly, a bit scary to watch, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Leaping at each other, grabbing feathers, proper wrestling, wings flapping, claws slashing, feathers just flying everywhere.
But what's really fascinating, something you highlighted in your notes, is that these serious fights are always dyadic. Just 2 males.
Never 3.
Never 3. You don't see a 3-way brawl. Sometimes a third male just hangs around nearby, almost waiting his turn. You saw Wonky Tail, right? He finished with Messy Shoulder and went straight over to fight Touching Combs.
Yeah, and Messy Shoulder just stayed out of it.
Exactly. It's almost like they had these scheduled one-on-one duels. Very structured, in a chaotic way.
And you stress that even though level 3 is rare, when it happens, these fights are absolutely deadly serious. They inflict real wounds.
And the sources you provided illustrate the potential for lethal outcomes really starkly, with the mention of racklehawns.
Ah, yes, the hybrids.
Right. These are crosses between black grouse and the much larger capercaillie. They show up mostly in Scandinavia, apparently. They're bigger, blacker, and on a black grouse lick, they have this lethal advantage, a longer reach.
And you described some truly horrifying footage. A racklehawn using that reach to grab a smaller black grouse by the head.
Yeah.
Pecking it to death, even decapitating it, carrying the head off, and then, disturbingly, copulating with the headless corpse. I mean, that detail is incredibly brutal.
It is. It's shocking.
Right.
But it leaves absolutely no doubt about the potential for lethal violence in this whole system. And the sources mention these hybrids are probably sterile.
Right.
And that hunters in Scandinavia sometimes actually kill them specifically to stop this kind of slaughter happening on the leks.
Wow. Okay, stepping back from that extreme violence to the, let's say, normal black grouse fights. One of the most surprising findings in the research you shared is about who we actually consider the winner.
Yes, this is fascinating. It completely flips our usual ideas about animal dominance, doesn't it?
Wow.
A big study from Finland, Annie Hämäläinen and colleagues looked at over 1,000 fights.
1,000?
Yeah, huge data set. And they concluded that the winner is the one that turns away first, presenting its tail to the opponent.
That seems counterintuitive. Turning your back is usually submission, right? Vulnerable.
Exactly. So their interpretation is that it's actually a sign of extreme confidence. It's like saying, I trust you won't attack my vulnerable back.
Huh. Confidence, not defeat.
Right. And you noted that the bird who didn't turn away often looks sort of relieved the fight's over, which suggests maybe they weren't trying to drive the other guy off the leak entirely, just end that specific confrontation.
And this study, it also found that winning this way wasn't really predicted by, like, plumage or size.
Nope.
Even the central males, the ones who fight the most, weren't necessarily more likely to win by turning away first.
Which really backs up this idea that within the leak structure itself, males are operating on something closer to equal terms with their immediate neighbors, at least in these boundary disputes. It doesn't seem like these daily fights establish some fixed, rigid hierarchy right there on the leg.
So it really challenges that whole idea of a clear dominance hierarchy, like some Arthurian myth, with one kingbird ruling everything.
Exactly. Fights end, and both males just go back to their territories, seemingly on equal footing again.
Each one is king of his own castle, as you put it, within that tiny patch.
That's the peculiar power of territory in the animal kingdom, isn't it? It gives this limited, almost arbitrary dominance to the owner, but only within those boundaries.
Yeah.
You brought up Nick Davies' work on speckled wood butterflies.
Oh, yeah, defending sun patches.
Right. He showed possession is 9/10 of the law. When he tricked two butterflies into thinking they both earned the same patch at the same time, the fight was way more furious than typical territory squabbles.
Right. Though we should mention you also included that earlier study from 91, Elatolo and colleagues.
Ah, yes. Good.
They found that males who were dominant in winter flocks did end up being more successful later in the leak, and those males had undamaged tails, lived longer. So maybe while the leak fights themselves don't create a rigid hierarchy in that moment, perhaps the females are still picking up on signs of overall quality or past dominance from off the leak.
Absolutely. It adds a layer of complexity, doesn't it? Suggests context really matters. Different selection pressures are likely at play in different situations, different times of year.
Okay.
But let's dive into the raw data from that long-term Finnish study, specifically looking at success on the leak itself. Because the statistics on male mating success are, well, you use the word brutal, and it fits.
Brutal is definitely the word. Get ready for this. Perhaps the most shocking bit from this research you sent. More than half of all male black grouse will never copulate. Not once. In their whole lives.
Never. It's incredible. And of the lucky few who do manage to mate, most only get a few chances. The vast majority have just one successful year. If that.
And here's where it gets really grim, showing the massive cost of even trying to be a top male. 3/4, 75% of those central territory holders who do manage to mate a lot in one season, they're dead within the year.
Just gone. 12 months later. The sheer physical ordeal of holding off rivals constantly, the endless energy poured into displaying, the stress of being attacked while trying to mate, not being able to leave and feed properly for hours during peak season, it seems it just breaks them.
It's a huge, often fatal price to pay for maybe passing on your genes.
Absolutely enormous.
So given that intense cost, what actually decides which males get into that tiny high mortality group that actually mates? Is it just being the biggest, the one with the best feathers?
Well, that 10-year Finnish study, looking at the data behind those grim stats, points really strongly towards behavior, at the leak being the primary factor. Maybe even more important than static appearance.
Behavior over looks.
The authors state it quite clearly, something like, sexual selection in black grouse operates primarily on male behavior. They suggest the physical traits, morphology, plumage, may act as additional cues, but the behavior seems to be the key driver for success.
But wait, older males are heavier, have longer tails, right? And they tend to be more successful. How does that fit with behavior being primary?
Ah, because age influences both. Yearlings are smaller, yes, shorter tails, but crucially, they also spend much less time actually at the leak. As males get older, up to about age 5, their attendance goes up. Their pugnacity, the time spent fighting or squaring off, increases significantly.
They get more aggressive.
Or at least spend more time in conflict. And they manage to get and hold territories closer to the center. So while things like weight and tail lengths do seem to matter once a male hits his peak years, maybe around age 3, actually getting to the center and being attractive to females seems to depend more on those behavioral things. Being there consistently, establishing and defending a spot, fighting often, displaying vigorously.
Ah, okay. So behavior reflects their current condition.
Exactly. Behavior reflects the bird's current state, its energy levels right now. Plumage reflects its condition months ago, back when it grew those feathers.
That's a really key distinction, current state versus past state. And this helps explain that other absolutely striking finding you highlighted about individual decline after a male's peak year.
Yes, the Finnish team found this amazing pattern. For individual birds, their performance across all 7 measured traits, physical ones like weight and tail length, and behavioral ones like attendance and fighting time, it declined significantly after that specific male's personal best year, regardless of his actual age at the time.
So the idea is a male basically puts in one massive all-out effort. One year where he gives absolutely everything he's got when he's physiologically ready.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it seems to completely exhaust him, debilitate him, so he just can't match it again.
Wow.
And the study backs this up. They found, quote, "The year of peak Lekking effort tended to occur in the last year the male was alive, especially in short-lived males."
Oh, man. So you mentioned seeing wonky tail this year, likely 5 or older, having his first observed mating seeming more pugnacious.
Yeah.
If this is his peak effort year, tragically, he might not be back next spring.
That's the implication. It looks like this one shot at peak performance might effectively kill them, whether they actually achieved huge mating success that specific season or not. The effort itself is potentially fatal.
That kind of insight, tracking individual birds like that over time, that must have taken thousands of hours, years of field work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a real testament to long-term ecological research. It was actually Rano Alatalo's final publication, apparently, a culmination of that incredible effort. It suggests there might be these underlying life strategies, Some males maybe go for a fast start, peak early, die young. Others take it slower, peak later, live a bit longer. It's almost as if they, unconsciously sense their physiological window and just decide, okay, this is it, go all in.
While these veterans are making this maybe final all-or-nothing push, what about the younger birds, the yearlings? You described them browner backs, shorter tail feathers.
Yeah, they arrive on the scene. Sometimes the residents mistake them for females initially, which causes some flutter jumping and confusion.
Huh.
They're drawn towards the action, towards the center. But if they try to actually slow down or settle near the middle, they just get attacked from all sides, driven out quickly. Unlike established neighbors, intruders like yearlings get hit hard and fast. No dear enemies courtesy extended to them.
Do they ever actually manage to mate in that first chaotic year?
It's very rare. That Finnish study, only 13 out of 193 yearlings managed a single mating. It seemed to happen more often in years when the population was expanding, maybe new leaks were forming in less ideal spots, like you mentioned, sheep pastures.
Ah, so maybe a chance for a bolder yearling to be a big fish in a small, temporary pond.
Exactly. Versus trying their luck in the main, super crowded, dangerous leak.
And as the season wears on, say, into mid-May,
Yeah.
you noticed a shift in the dynamics, right? The central guys start looking a bit ragged.
Definitely. You see the wear and tear, missing feathers, visible stars, they've lost weight, probably carrying more parasites. Their displaying becomes more sporadic. You see them resting more often.
And this is when the yearlings get bolder?
Yeah, they start pushing their luck a bit more. They might challenge an older male, maybe even stand their ground and fight for a second before turning tail if they aren't really ready. Or they find little uncontested spots further out from the center. Carl Salisbury's research actually documented this yearling attendance, and their fighting rates roughly double as the season progresses.
So that immense cost of being a central male, it clearly extends beyond just the peak Lekking hours or even the season itself.
It really does. Mortality is highest right after the Lekking season ends, probably due to sheer exhaustion, hunger, making them vulnerable to sickness, predators. They're just physically spent.
But despite all that cost, being a central cock, even for just one brutal season, can be genetically worth it.
It seems so. The potential payoff is huge. The top male on a big leak might get a surprising number of matings, maybe 14, 15, perhaps even more.
Wow.
And larger lakes attract more females. That Finnish study, again, they calculated about 1.75 more copulations for every extra male present at a leak.
Okay, so females prefer bigger leks, and this preference you're suggesting is actually the key driving force behind why leks evolved in the first place.
This is the really revolutionary idea, the one that took science quite a while to fully embrace. By consistently preferring these large, dense gatherings of males, females themselves are the evolutionary force. They're essentially breeding the licking habit into the males over generations.
So for a young male, joining a big leak is a massive gamble.
Huge gamble. Low probability of ever becoming top cock. But the potential genetic jackpot, if they do make it, is enormous. And in a species where females have evolved to choose mates this way, there isn't really another viable strategy for the males. They are, as the source material puts it, bred to leak by females.
before that female-centric idea really took hold, scientists had other theories, right? Mostly focused on benefits for the
Oh,
males.
yeah. Older theories included things like maybe grouping reduces predation risk through shared vigilance, or maybe amplifying their calls attracts females from further away, or simply that suitable habitat was limited, forcing them together.
Makes sense on the surface.
But researchers like Jack Bradbury, who studied sage grouse back in the 80s, found some pretty significant flaws in those explanations.
So Bradbury suggested alternative.
He did. Two main ones. The hotspot model, maybe males just gather where females are already likely to pass through or congregate, like near a key resource or along a travel route.
Yeah.
Or the female preference model. Maybe females simply prefer large gatherings because it makes it easier for them to compare many males at once and choose the fittest.
How well do those fit the black grouse situation described in your sources?
Well, the hotspot model doesn't seem to fit black grouse that well. The leak sites themselves are often pretty unremarkable places, not near feeding grounds. The females seem to fly in specifically to mate, and there's usually no food or water at the leak itself.
Unlike sage grouse, you mentioned, who leak right in their food source, the sagebrush.
Exactly. So hotspot doesn't seem like the main driver for black grouse.
What about the other idea, the hotshot model, where males cluster around the most attractive guy?
Right, that was proposed by Bruce Beeler and Mercedes Foster. The idea is males gather around the sexiest male, hoping to intercept some females drawn to him. But interestingly, Beeler and Foster also argued against the idea of strong female choice being the main driver. They felt there was too much evidence of males interrupting each other's mating attempts, controlling who gets to mate. And they felt there wasn't enough clear difference between males for females to reliably base a choice on.
So they leaned more towards the males deciding things amongst themselves.
Kind of, yeah. It sounds a bit like the old Victorian naturalists' view, doesn't it? The leak as a sort of jousting tournament where the females are just passive spectators who end up with the winner of the male battles.
Right. Beneficiaries, not choosers.
Beeler and Foster even wrote something like, field evidence indicates that females are more conservative than they are choosy. They suggested females might just pick the same male year after year, and younger females just copy the older ones. And over time, this collective copying is what leads to a particular male gaining hotshot status.
But hang on, we just talked about those brutal statistics for black grouse. Does that gaining status over years idea really hold up?
That's a major snag, isn't it? Black grouse rarely seem to survive long enough to have two shots at being a hotshot based on multi-year status. For them, hotshot status seems almost instant for that single, often fatal peak season. Remember, 3/4 of successful central males don't make it to the next year.
Right.
Plus, calling the dynamic dominance might be a bit misleading when a male is only dominant in his tiny patch and basically subordinate everywhere else on the leak.
And here's another crucial point you pulled from the sources. If males were the ones primarily deciding who mates, maybe through fighting, you'd expect fighting to ramp up when the females arrive, right? To settle things.
Exactly. But the observations show the complete opposite happens. When females arrive on the leak, fighting dramatically decreases.
It dives down.
Yeah. You noted, and observers going way back like Salou saw it too, he thought the female presence diverted combat, suggesting females appreciated the display, not the mere uncouth violence, as he put it. His interpretation, of course.
But modern science has actually quantified this.
It has. Sam Snow and colleagues did a study on sage grouse using a sophisticated analysis, a relational event model on over 1,500 interactions. They measured exactly how male behavior changed with female presence.
And what did they find?
Their findings were really emphatic. Quote, "Our analysis reveals that fighting's primary function is not to impress females. Indeed, males are less likely to start and more likely to leave fights with females present."
Wow. Less likely to start, more likely to leave. So fighting isn't actually attracting females or even adding to the male's appeal.
Snow's conclusion was definitive. We recovered no evidence that fighting is directly attractive, informative, or functions in an additive way with display to contribute to the solicitation of copulation by females. In fact, a male's mating success seemed to depend partly on his tactical ability to avoid having his courtship attempts interrupted by fights. Lots of males who were technically undefeated in fights remained unmated.
Okay, so it really seems like Beeler and Foster, and perhaps others focusing on male competition, might have missed something fundamental about female choice.
It appears so. They might have overlooked the sheer power of something like the Fisher runaway effect, which is kind of a version of the hotshot model, but crucially, It centers female choice.
Remind me how that works again.
Basically, females develop an inherited preference for a particular male trait, maybe a longer tail, brighter color, whatever.
Mm.
Their daughters inherit this preference, and their sons inherit the trait. This creates a positive feedback loop. Females prefer the trait, so males with the trait get more mates, so the trait and the preference for it both spread. Even if the trait itself isn't directly related to good genes or survival ability, it just becomes fashionable.
Because females want sons who are attractive to the next generation of females.
Exactly. They want sexy sons. So they inherit this habit of copying, of following the local mate choice fashion. And this makes females naturally gregarious. During the mating season, they're drawn to the largest gatherings of males because that's where they have the best chance to see who's currently in fashion and copy the choices of others.
Which brings us right back to the simple point. Males gather because females choose to mate there.
Pretty much. Hotshot males become hotshots, not because they dominate other males necessarily, but because females inherit this habit of choosing the same type of male, often the one in the center of the league.
Okay. But Snow's data suggested something even more subtle, didn't it? That females might not just be selecting for flashy displays or central positions, but maybe also for males who can tolerate each other.
Yes, that they might have actually bred reduced aggressiveness into the species, at least during the Lekking period, by preferring males who could display intensely without constantly getting into disruptive fights.
Which leads to that really provocative idea you floated. Does a black grouse lick, despite all the obvious conflict, actually function a bit like a team?
A team of rivals, for sure, but maybe a team nonetheless. Think about the tolerance required. Most male birds would never let another male get within a few meters during breeding season, let alone dozens packed shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, that's true.
And your own observations back this up. After the intense licking is over, these same birds often gather in a nearby field, feeding together like comrades, almost like best friends, even though an hour earlier they wanted to tear each other apart.
That's bizarre. And you mentioned seeing this kind of surprising tolerance or even cooperation in other Lekking species, too, like ruffs.
Yes, those Arctic shorebirds. When they're not on the leak, they feed in these tight flocks, made up exclusively of males from a single leak. Their old scientific name, Philomachus pugnax, means belligerent lover of fighting, which definitely fits the leak. But off the leak, they seem to be best buddies. It really highlights that strange duality, intense competition, alongside surprising tolerance.
And then there are species with even more complex cooperation, like those weird-looking, long-wattled umbrella birds.
Right, in Ecuador.
Yeah.
Bizarre appearance, helmet dome, floppy wattle. They leak in a more spread-out way, but researchers found they actually leave and return to the leak together in coordinated groups. They maintain larger social groups off the leak, specifically during peak Lekking activity.
Not for food or predators.
Apparently not. The researchers concluded it seems to be about coordinating the team game of displaying together to maximize their collective attraction to females.
And mannequins in South America take it even further, with actual choreographed dances.
Oh, absolutely. Some species have incredibly complex routines. Golden-winged mannequins have a two-male leapfrog display. Blue mannequins involve 4 or 5 males in these elaborate backward leapfrog sequences, performing for a female perched nearby, even making specific calls during the display. And you mentioned turkeys, too, groups of brothers teaming up to display together.
So what's in it for the backup dancers? The non-alpha mannequins who perform but don't get to meet?
That's the big question. Maybe they inherit the spot eventually. But it can take years, apparently, and most probably don't make it. Richard Prum, a researcher who studies this, has suggested that maybe they're essentially victims of female choice, that females have selected for joint dancing, forcing this cooperation.
Forced cooperation.
Prum puts it very strongly, something like, obligatory male-male cooperation is a total loss for the vast majority of males. Females are completely in charge. His view is that female preference can be so powerful, it literally makes males into team players, even if it doesn't benefit most of them individually.
Wow. So you considered if maybe the black grouse teams feeding together might be relatives, kin selection driving the tolerance, like how peacock brothers sometimes join the same league.
Kin selection is definitely a force that can drive cooperation. But for black grouse, there seems to be enough dispersal that most males on a specific leak probably aren't closely related.
Okay.
And the crucial evidence against it here is that related males who are neighbors on the leak apparently don't go easy on each other during fights. So kinship probably isn't the main explanation for that post-lick tolerance.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, but Staying with sexual selection shaping male traits, you brought up the fascinating case of the European giant elk, the Irish elk.
Ah, yes, those magnificent animals. Antlers up to, what, 4 meters across? Weighing 40 kilos? Just enormous. For ages, the standard story was they were victims of runaway sexual selection. Their antlers got so ridiculously big for fighting that they caused their extinction.
But that idea is questioned now.
It is, yeah,
Huh.
for several reasons. They died out before humans arrived in some areas, suggesting it wasn't just hunting. They lived in open habitats where huge antlers might not have been that much of a hindrance day to day. And fossil evidence suggests weaker males with smaller antlers actually died more often in winter.
So maybe the huge antlers weren't the problem.
Or at least not in the way we thought. The question became, were they purely for fighting or also for display? Or were they even truly outsized compared to their large body size? Maybe compared to, say, a fallow deer with its big palmate antlers. One study suggested the giant elk antlers were actually only just strong enough to withstand fighting forces, maybe better designed for resisting twisting than direct pushing. And Professor Adrian Lister, a top expert you quoted, thinks we can't rule out that female choice was a major factor, or even that these giant stags lecked, like fallow deer do.
So the antlers might have been more about intimidating rivals and attracting females through display.
Lister thinks it's very possible. He said something like, in this display of strength, bigger antlers were probably more intimidating to other males and more desirable to the females who would wander into the leak to choose their mate. It highlights how intertwined fighting ability and display attractiveness can be.
Makes you wonder, as you jokingly suggested, if we could bring them back with gene editing just to see if they lecked.
Huh. A thought experiment for another time, perhaps. But it links nicely to the general point about sex size difference. In species where male-male combat is really the main event, males tend to get much bigger than females. Think elephant seals, males 3 times the size. But where display is maybe more important, the size difference can be smaller. Black grouse males, for instance, are only about 20–30% heavier than females. Not a huge difference.
And sometimes, as you pointed out, the energy demands of displays seem to actively select for males being smaller than females.
The lesser florican is such a striking example of this. It's a rare bustard from western India. Not a Lekking species. Males are widely dispersed. Their display is incredible. They leap about 6 feet straight up into the air hundreds of times a day.
Hundreds. Wow.
Yeah. One study recorded up to 400 jumps a day, often in hot, humid conditions, flapping their wings to make a rattling sound, all to attract females flying over.
And the curious thing you noted.
The lesser florican is the smallest bustard species, and it's the only one where the males are significantly smaller than the females.
Smaller. Why?
Well, think about it. Small size isn't great for fighting, which they rarely do anyway. But it is a massive advantage if you need to launch yourself 6 feet upwards every minute or so for hours on end in hot weather. The energy cost of that display is huge, and being smaller reduces that cost dramatically. The next smallest bustard species, which doesn't do this aerial leap, actually has males slightly larger than females, as you'd expect.
So the display strategy itself directly selected for smaller male size. That's fascinating.
It really shows how different selective pressures can shape bodies in unexpected ways.
Okay, circling right back to where we started then, on the black grouse lack. You mentioned observing Black Spot having a particularly good day.
Yes, one observation noted him mating with 6 different females in one session, including one female who is recognized as being on her 3rd visit to the leak, which again just highlights the importance of female choice and their visitation patterns. They're not just picking randomly.
And these females can store sperm for later use, right?
They can, yes.
Yeah.
Fertilizing their eggs just before laying. So successful mating doesn't guarantee paternity for the very next egg, maybe, but it gives the male his ticket in the genetic lottery.
Wow. Okay. That has been an absolutely deep dive into just one species, but revealing so much about animal behavior, sexual selection, evolution. I mean, from the brutal life and death fights and those tragic Rackelhan hybrids.
To that completely counterintuitive idea of the winner being the one who turns away first.
Right. And the absolutely brutal statistics on the cost of success, that 3/4 mortality rate for top males.
And then the surprising evidence for tolerance, maybe even cooperation among these intense rivals. The seemingly overwhelming power of female choice driving the whole system. And how different pressures, like the sheer energy needed for display, can even lead to males becoming smaller than females. It just shows, doesn't it, that what looks like simple aggression or competition on the surface is often driven by these incredibly complex, layered, and fascinating dynamics.
It really does. This deep dive, using the sources you provided, has given us a completely new way to look at this corner of the natural world. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
And it leaves us, and you, with an important question to think about, doesn't it? If black grouse leks, which look like pure chaotic conflict, might actually function more like a complex female-driven team, well, what other animal behaviors, or maybe even human interactions that seem obvious on the surface? What hidden dynamics, what counterintuitive pressures, or complex historical forces like female choice might actually be driving them? Things we haven't fully understood yet.
That's a great question to chew on. Thanks for bringing us all this incredible material to explore today.